This happened to me not too long ago. When I decided to move to another city, which has now become my home, I was looking for a rental with enough space to accommodate my family. There were many options, but I wanted to find something conveniently located and well-finished to make living there pleasant. One option particularly caught my attention. A townhouse was being rented at the price of an apartment. 3 floors, a convenient layout of rooms, a sauna, all the necessary furniture and appliances. The condition, judging by the photos, was excellent. Moreover, it was right in the city center. Perfect. I contacted the owner and found it easy and pleasant to communicate with him. Well, this must be fate, I thought, and paid the deposit. I was supposed to move in first, and then my family would follow. I brought a lot of things with me, including my beloved cat, who was my battle buddy and close friend. I'm not joking, Rambo understands everything very well and is always on my side. The owner greeted me warmly, showed me everything, received the payment, handed over the keys, and left. Everything was as usual. And so, this is where the reason for my story begins. The first thing that surprised me was my cat's behavior. Over the years, we had moved several times, and for Rambo, it had always been fun. On previous occasions, he would sniff everything in half an hour, then race around the new space, tossing and chasing anything that could be considered a mouse. But now, my cat, with his ears pinned back and half crouched, was creeping along the wall, glancing nervously over his shoulder at every noise and even at shadows. At that moment, I explained it to myself by thinking that the large and unfamiliar house had scared him. Later, I went to the store, bought groceries, and decided to sharpen a knife before cooking. It was my favorite knife and sharpening stone, which I had brought with me. I sharpened it like a blade. I cut what I needed and put it back in its place. A couple of hours later, I took out the knife again to make a sandwich, and it was dull, just as if it hadn't been sharpened for months. I wasn't cutting the sausage, I was pressing down on it. This seriously puzzled me. I sharpen knives well, and I know how long my sharpening lasts. I thought about it, but couldn't figure it out, so I sharpened the knife again. I decided to spend the first night sleeping on the couch in the living room. It was the most comfortable place, and the kitchen was close. I woke up in the middle of the night as if someone had nudged me. I opened my eyes, and there was a figure standing over me, dark and wearing a hood. I blinked, still half asleep, and there was no one there. But the first impression was so vivid that there was no doubt. Someone had been standing there. I got up, turned on the lights everywhere, walked around the house, checked the doors. They were locked, and of course, there was no one in the house. That night, I noticed that my extremely curious cat, who never missed exploring even the smallest detail of something new, didn't come downstairs at all. He stayed with me on the second floor and didn't even go near the edge of the stairs. Very strange for him, but again, I attributed it to the large space, thinking he wasn't yet comfortable. The next morning, the electric kettle burned out. Well, maybe it was just old. My family was supposed to arrive in a day, so I was tidying up, unpacking a couple of boxes and taking out our things. And that was it. I understood that I should unpack everything else. But something was stopping me. I couldn't explain it, even to myself. I decided to sleep in the bedroom on the second night. I lay down, and my cat came to me, and I fell asleep to his gentle purring. Again, I woke up in the middle of the night, not knowing why. I looked, and on the shelf was a glowing figurine that I had brought with me. It was glowing, and something else was glowing on the wall. I was very sleepy and couldn't remember what I had placed on the wall shelf that could glow. Not wanting to bother with it, I fell asleep again. I woke up at dawn because I heard someone walking up the stairs. I lay there with my eyes closed but clearly heard the sound of heavy footsteps. I jumped up and quickly pulled on my pants. My first thought was that I'd forgotten to lock the door and someone had entered. I rushed out to the stairs, ready for anything, and no one. Naturally, I turned on the lights everywhere, went downstairs, and checked the doors. They were locked. Silence. Puzzled, I went back to bed. As I lay there, I remembered how well my figurines were glowing in the night. In the early morning light, the room was already well lit, so I looked at the figurine I had placed near the bed and then at the wall where the shelf should have been. And that was when, for the first time, I felt my hair stand on end. There was no shelf. It was on the opposite wall. The wall in front of me was bare, so what could have been glowing? Footsteps on the stairs, strange awakenings, glowing in the dark, rapidly dulling knives, and malfunctioning appliances. I started putting two and two together. I had encountered strange phenomena before and wasn't particularly afraid of them. But here, I felt something much more serious than anything I had ever seen or heard. Still, my nerves were strong enough, and despite these thoughts, I eventually fell asleep again. I want to talk separately about the basement. It was set up quite comfortably. A shower, a sauna, and a relaxation room. Just a small window high up on the wall looked out to the street. You would think I could just fire up the sauna and enjoy. But I felt strange down there, cold, even though the radiators were hot. And there was this unpleasant sensation, as if my head was being squeezed from all sides. I didn't want to do anything there. A certain sadness, even depressive thoughts would come over me. In short, I sat there for a bit and then bolted upstairs to where the sunlight was, where nothing pressed down on me, and where I felt lighter. And my cat simply couldn't be dragged down there. When I carried him in to introduce him to the house, he walked around with his ears pinned back, sniffed quietly, climbed up the stairs on bent legs, and never went down again on his own. My family arrived, bringing the rest of our things. In the excitement and joy of the reunion, I forgot about my thoughts. That evening, we heated the sauna and had a great time. The children were put to bed in the nursery, and we went to bed ourselves. I woke up to my wife gently nudging me. "Do you hear that?" she asked me in a barely audible whisper. I listened and heard it too. Downstairs, in the hallway, we had a clothes dryer. I had just bought it, unpacked it, and hadn't yet moved it upstairs. And I could hear the dryer rattling as if someone was brushing against it, passing by, back and forth. And then footsteps again, on the stairs, quiet and approaching. This couldn't be written off as a half-asleep state. My wife squeezed my hand tightly in fear. We were both hearing the same thing. Of course, I jumped up, grabbed a stool, the only thing handy, dashed out of the bedroom to defend my family from intruders, and complete silence. An empty staircase, and a door locked with 2 latches. I checked the entire house, including the basement, and found no one. I went back to the bedroom and managed to calm my wife down, and we eventually fell asleep. I woke up at dawn to the sound of the dryer rattling again, as if someone was brushing against it with their shoulder as they passed. Well, I didn't jump up this time or rush to check. By then, I already knew we just needed to find another place to live. But at that moment, I thought we'd stay here for the month, since we had already paid, find something else, and then move out. The next day, we were expecting guests. My wife's friend, who lived in this city, was supposed to come over with her family. Good. The time came, and my wife went out to the store and to meet our guests. I lay down on the couch to take a nap and actually fell asleep. I woke up to a wild scream. A child was screaming so loudly as if they were being hurt. No exaggeration. The sounds, as you can imagine, were extremely unpleasant to hear. I realized with dismay that this incessant source of screaming was entering through my front door. It was my wife's friend's daughter, 4 years old at the time, who was screaming. They were both trying to calm her down, my wife and her friend, while our children came out and also tried to help. But it was no use. Amidst the screaming, I could make out some words. The child didn't want to come in and was demanding to go home. They finally managed to get her inside, and she started to calm down a bit as she got distracted by our kids. Our guests were very embarrassed by their child's behavior, with my wife's friend apologizing repeatedly, saying that her daughter was usually as quiet as a mouse and that she had never seen her in such a state before. I didn't believe it at the time, but everything settled down, and we sat down for lunch. We were eating and chatting, and suddenly the little girl started laughing for no apparent reason. laughing and pointing towards the doorway. "Why are you laughing so much?" her mother asked. "There's a ghost standing there," the girl replied. "It's making funny faces." Everyone at the table fell silent, but I think only my hair stood on end once again. I realized that this was probably not a made-up story, and it seemed I was beginning to understand why she had screamed so much when they brought her in. By the way, I saw that child later at her home, and she was indeed very calm and not prone to tantrums. But the most interesting part was still to come. We fired up the sauna again and decided to have a family steam. Suddenly, in the basement, a commotion started. At some point, as I was passing by the sauna, I caught a glimpse out of the corner of my eye that someone was sitting in it. There was a dim light inside, and I distinctly saw someone on the bench. Naturally, I thought my wife had already started steaming without me. How surprised I was when I went into the relaxation room and saw my entire family there. I went back to check the sauna, and it was empty. I no longer wanted to steam. But what could I do? I couldn't leave my wife and kids in the sauna with some unknown entity, and things only escalated from there. We finished steaming, the kids went to bed, my wife stayed up with me for a while, and then she also went to bed. I was left dozing on the couch in the relaxation room. My cat was next to me. The kids had brought him down. He also seemed to have warmed up by my side and fell asleep. Suddenly, Rambo jumped up and shook his head as if something was bothering him. Then he lifted his head and looked me straight in the eyes. For those who don't know, it's not common for cats to stare directly into your eyes for long. For felines, it's considered bad manners. But Rambo looked me right in the eyes with a completely alien, conscious gaze. That look sent shivers down my spine. There was both curiosity and intense hostility in that gaze. It wasn't the look of a cat, let alone my cat. It wasn't even the look of a human. It felt like something entirely foreign to both human and animal nature was behind that gaze. I can't even describe how terrifying it was to see this. My hair stood on end all over my body. The horror was so overwhelming that I just wanted to bolt out of the basement. I realized that something had taken over my cat. Rambo was possessed. Meanwhile, the cat continued to watch me, moving slowly around the room. He kept staring at me, intelligently, inquisitively. The fur on his back stood on end, and I couldn't tell if it was a reaction to the possession or the creature's reaction to me. He looked around as if he were surveying the surroundings, turned his back, and then looked me in the eyes again, glancing over his shoulder. At that moment, only one thought crossed my mind. Just don't start talking. I knew of cases where, under the influence of a certain presence, animals began to speak. And I just couldn't handle that. An overwhelming terror made my hair stand on end, and I realized I had to run, out of the room now and out of the house in the morning. I walked around Rambo, who was lying on the floor watching me, left the lounge, and bolted upstairs. I understood that I was leaving my beloved cat alone with that presence, but for some reason, at that moment, I was absolutely certain that nothing would happen to him, and I was right. About 10 minutes later, the cat came to me, rubbed against my legs, and it was my old Rambo, with all his usual habits. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen, browsing rental ads. I heard, oh, how much I heard that night. Footsteps on the stairs, sounds like someone was inserting a key into the front door lock, and noises from the basement. But understanding what was happening around me, I no longer ran anywhere or looked for anyone. I just sat quietly, trying not to glance around, because out of the corner of my eye, I kept catching glimpses of some shadows moving. By dawn, when it started to get light, I finally managed to fall asleep. My wife understood immediately. After hearing what she did with me and listening to my story about Rambo's possession, she agreed that we needed to move out as quickly as possible. So, right at 10 in the morning, I started calling the rental ads I found and setting up viewings. By noon, I was already heading to my first appointment. To be honest, as soon as I stepped outside, I felt such relief. Breathing was easy, and the sleepiness and apathy were gone in an instant. My head was clear. It was wonderful. So, I was on my way to the address when I got a text from my wife. Someone's knocking on the door to the basement, from the inside, loudly, for a long time. I broke out in a cold sweat. I stopped and called my wife. She, in a trembling voice, repeated what she had written. Someone was knocking. Listen. And I heard it, like a man persistently knocking with his knuckles, demanding to be let in. Honestly, it was terrifying. But what could I do? We had to find a new place to live. I told her to take the kids and leave the house, to wait for me in a cafe, and I went to the viewing. That day, I found a good apartment and arranged to move in the very next day. We were in for one last night in the fun townhouse. I picked up my family from the cafe and returned home. We packed everything up very quickly. I hadn't unpacked most of the boxes anyway. Something just wouldn't let me do it. We packed up the things we were using and started preparing dinner. On the last evening, the refrigerator broke. It stopped freezing. The plumbing failed. It stopped draining. And throughout the house, here and there, you could smell gas and burning wires. Oh, how worried I was then. I walked through all the rooms several times, feeling the walls to see if they were hot. My biggest fear was a fire. Somehow we managed to lie down to sleep, and, probably due to emotional and physical exhaustion, we fell asleep quite quickly. I woke up in the middle of the night to a sudden noise. I sat up in bed. Bang! Bang! The front door was clearly and very loudly slamming. My first thought was that someone was taking our boxes out and periodically slamming the door. I generally understood what was happening, but my rational mind took over, and I quietly left the bedroom. Everything went silent. I cautiously walked to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and went downstairs. The front door was locked, on 2 latches, as usual. The things were in their places. And the feeling of being watched. It's just impossible to describe. From the direction of the entrance to the basement, I could feel, though not see, a presence standing in the doorway. The air seemed to thicken, like cotton, and it became harder to breathe. Driven by fear, I rushed upstairs and, locking myself in the bedroom, lay down in bed. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The things I heard, the slamming of the front door, footsteps on the stairs, footsteps in the hallway on the 2nd floor, distant and muffled voices. I just lay there, knowing that I had to hold out until morning, and only prayed that my family wouldn't wake up and get scared. What a relief I felt when the moving truck left that cursed house with our things. I handed the keys to the owner, explaining rather incoherently the reason for our sudden departure. He just shrugged. I'll say again, I've encountered the supernatural quite a bit in my life. I've seen and heard a lot of different things, but such intense and varied manifestations of these phenomena in one place, that's just nonsense.